A cry in the courtroom. The heavy oak doors of Courtroom 4B groaned as they swung open, allowing the morning light to flood in through tall, stained glass windows. The scent of polished wood and old books lingered in the air, mingling with the hushed whispers of legal clerks and attorneys adjusting their notes. At the center of it all sat Lily Monroe, an 8-year-old girl, barely tall enough for her feet to touch the floor from the oversized leather chair she had been placed in. She was dressed in a pale blue dress with delicate white lace at the collar, a dress her late mother had once lovingly chosen for special occasions. But today, it felt different. Today wasn't special. Today felt terrifying. Her small fingers clutched the fabric of her skirt, twisting it anxiously. Her brown curls cascaded around her delicate face, partially hiding the storm of emotions flickering in her deep green eyes. Before her, standing at the petitioner's table, was Thomas Reed, her foster father. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and immaculately dressed in a dark navy suit. His sharp, chiseled features and neatly trimmed beard made him look like a man who had control over everything. But there was something about him, something in the way his fingers tapped restlessly against the wooden podium, the way his eyes darted around the room, as if scanning for a way out. At the judge's bench sat Margaret Sinclair, an experienced judge with decades of handling family court cases. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and her reading glasses rested at the tip of her nose. Her keen, watchful eyes softened as she looked down at the small girl before her. Clearing her throat, she began, her voice firm yet gentle. "We are gathered today to review the adoption petition of Thomas Reed for Lily Monroe. Mr. Reed has served as Lily's foster parent for the past 4 years and is now seeking permanent guardianship." A ripple of nods passed through the courtroom. To most, this was a routine case, a foster father formally adopting the child he had raised. It should have been a joyous moment. A child finding a forever home. But Judge Sinclair noticed something others didn't. Lily's hands were shaking. And when she glanced at Mr. Reed, she saw something unexpected. His jaw was clenched. His normally confident demeanor was faltering. The judge turned back to the little girl and offered her a warm smile. "Lily, sweetheart, are you ready to be adopted by Mr. Reed?" The courtroom fell silent. The air felt thick, heavy with anticipation. Then, "No!" Lily's scream shattered the stillness. Gasps erupted around the room. The little girl shot out of her seat, her tiny shoes skidding against the floor as she bolted forward. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she grasped the edge of the judge's robe with trembling hands. "Please," she sobbed. "Don't let him adopt me." A stunned silence followed. The attorneys exchanged shocked glances. The social worker, Ms. Hanley, nearly dropped her files. Judge Sinclair froze. This was unexpected. She carefully placed her hands on the bench and leaned forward. "Lily, sweetheart, why don't you want Mr. Reed to adopt you?" Lily's breath hitched. She wiped her nose with the back of her sleeve, glancing over her shoulder at Thomas Reed, who now stood motionless, his face unreadable. Then, in a whisper so soft the judge barely caught it, Lily spoke the words that changed everything. "Mama told me never to trust him." A cold chill swept through the courtroom. Judge Sinclair stiffened. Lily's mother was dead. Her death had been ruled a tragic accident. So why had she warned her daughter about the very man who now sought to adopt her? Judge Sinclair turned sharply to Mr. Reed. "Mr. Reed," she said carefully, her voice steady but pointed, "do you know what Lily is referring to?" Thomas blinked, then forced a chuckle, low and humorless. "Your Honor, I have no idea. Lily was very young when her mother passed. Maybe she misunderstood something." His words were smooth, practiced. But his hands betrayed him, clenching and unclenching, his fingers curling into tight fists. The judge's sharp gaze didn't waver. "Misunderstood what, exactly?" Thomas hesitated for a fraction of a second. I don't know. Maybe her mother was just overprotective. You know how parents can be. Judge Sinclair didn't respond. Instead, she turned back to Lily, kneeling slightly so her face was level with the trembling girl. Sweetheart, she said softly, did your mother ever tell you why she didn't trust Mr. Reed? Lily hesitated. Her little hands gripped the judge's robe tighter, her breathing shaky. Then, she whispered something that sent a shiver down Sinclair's spine. Mama said he hurt people before. Gasps filled the courtroom. Thomas Reed's entire body went rigid. That's ridiculous, he snapped, his voice sharper than before. Lily is confused. Her mother was sick toward the end. She was saying all kinds of things that didn't make sense. Judge Sinclair's gaze darkened. Something wasn't right. She turned toward the bailiff standing near the door. Clear the courtroom, she ordered. Except for necessary legal parties. We need to speak with Lily privately. The decision was made. This was no longer a simple adoption case. Something was terribly wrong. And Judge Sinclair was going to find out what. The shadows beneath the surface. The weight of Lily's words hung heavy in the air, pressing down on the courtroom like a storm cloud ready to burst. Mama said he hurt people before. Judge Margaret Sinclair sat frozen for a brief moment, her weathered fingers gripping the armrests of her chair. She had presided over hundreds, no, thousands, of adoption cases, but nothing had ever unraveled quite like this. The attorneys whispered urgently to their clients. The social worker, Ms. Hanley, shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Lily and Thomas Reed. The tension in the room was suffocating. Judge Sinclair cleared her throat. Bailiff, clear the courtroom. The command was swift and final. Murmurs of protest rose, but the bailiff, a tall, stocky man named Officer Barnes, immediately stepped forward. All spectators must exit. Only legal representatives and involved parties will remain. The room stirred with movement as people shuffled toward the doors, a few casting wary glances at Lily, who still clung tightly to the judge's robe. Only a handful remained. Thomas Reed, whose expression had hardened into something unreadable. Ms. Hanley, clutching her case files with uncertain hands. Lily's court-appointed attorney, Mr. Fields, who had thus far remained silent, his brow furrowed in deep thought. The bailiff, standing firm near the exit. And, of course, Lily Monroe, whose fragile body trembled as she pressed her face into the soft fabric of the judge's robe. The heavy doors slammed shut. A thick silence followed. Judge Sinclair turned back to Lily and softened her voice. Sweetheart, can you tell me what your mother meant when she said that? Lily hesitated. Her small fingers twisted the lace trim of her dress. Her eyes darted to Thomas Reed. It was a quick glance, barely noticeable. But the judge saw it. Fear. Not childish nervousness. Not simple discomfort. Pure, unfiltered fear. That was when Judge Sinclair knew, Lily wasn't just confused. She was terrified. Lily's voice cracked. Mama told me. She looked at the judge, then at Ms. Hanley, and then back to the judge. Her voice was a whisper. She told me to run if something happened to her. Judge Sinclair's stomach dropped. What do you mean, sweetheart? She pressed gently. Lily bit her lip. Her green eyes shimmered with tears. Her tiny voice barely reached across the room. She told me, if she wasn't here anymore, not to trust Mr. Reed. She said. He's not who he says he is. The courtroom was dead silent. Thomas Reed suddenly let out a sharp, forced laugh. Your Honor, this is insane. His hands twitched at his sides. Lily is a child. She was only 4 when her mother passed away. Do you really think she remembers any of that? Judge Sinclair narrowed her eyes at him. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice steady but firm, "you seem awfully eager to dismiss this." Thomas Reed clenched his jaw. "Because it's nonsense," he shot back. But the judge wasn't convinced. Turning to Ms. Hanley, she asked, "What do we know about Mr. Reed's background?" The social worker blinked in surprise. She fumbled with her files, flipping through documents. "He passed all screenings, of course. No criminal record. Stable employment as a construction site supervisor. Well respected in his community. All of our home visits showed a safe environment for Lily." Judge Sinclair listened carefully. Then she glanced at Lily. The child's small fingers dug into the fabric of her dress. Something wasn't adding up. Judge Sinclair looked back at the bailiff. "Officer Barnes, I'd like you to perform an immediate background verification on Thomas Reed. See if there's anything, even the smallest discrepancy, in his records." Thomas stiffened. "What? Judge, this is ridiculous. I have been Lily's father for years." "You are her foster father," Judge Sinclair corrected coldly. "Until today." Her tone made it clear, the adoption was no longer happening today. Ms. Hanley swallowed hard and shifted in her seat. "Your Honor, what exactly are we looking for?" Judge Sinclair exhaled. "Anything. Because something about this doesn't feel right." A long pause followed. Then, Lily spoke again. Her voice trembled. "He locked me in the closet." The room froze. Judge Sinclair's heartbeat spiked. "What?" Lily's hands balled into fists. Her lips trembled. "When I got in trouble," she whispered, "he locked me in the closet. Sometimes for a long time." Ms. Hanley's eyes went wide with horror. "Oh my God." Thomas immediately stepped forward. "That is a lie." His voice was sharp, desperate. "She's making this up. Lily has a wild imagination. She used to play hide and seek." Lily flinched. Judge Sinclair saw it. A small, instinctive flinch. The kind a child makes when they expect to be yelled at. Or worse. That was all the confirmation she needed. Judge Sinclair's expression hardened. She turned to the bailiff. "Officer Barnes, escort Mr. Reed out of this courtroom. Right now." The tension snapped like a whip. Thomas's face turned red with fury. "Wait a damn second. You are not to be in Lily Monroe's presence until further notice," Judge Sinclair declared. Her voice was cold, authoritative. "This hearing is adjourned until a full investigation is completed." Officer Barnes stepped forward, gripping Thomas's arm. "Sir, I need you to come with me." Thomas yanked his arm away. His eyes burned with rage. "This is a joke," he hissed. "I have raised this kid for years. You really think she'd be alive if it weren't for me?" Judge Sinclair's blood ran cold. That sentence. "You really think she'd be alive if it weren't for me?" Thomas Reed realized his mistake the second it left his mouth. The room went dead silent. Judge Sinclair's eyes narrowed to ice-cold slits. "Officer Barnes." Her voice was deadly calm. "Take him into custody. Now." The bailiff grabbed Thomas's wrist. "Wait, what? I didn't mean." "You are officially under investigation," Judge Sinclair stated coldly. "And until further notice, you are to have no contact with Lily Monroe." Lily's breath hitched. For the first time since entering the courtroom. She looked relieved. Thomas Reed's face twisted with rage as Officer Barnes began to drag him toward the exit. "This is a mistake," he yelled. "I'm a good man. You're ruining my life over a little girl's lies." The courtroom doors slammed shut. Silence fell. Judge Sinclair turned to Lily, her heart aching as she saw the little girl's frail shoulders shaking. The judge stood and walked around the bench. She knelt down before Lily, gently placing a hand on the child's shoulder. "You're safe now, sweetheart," she whispered. For the first time in 4 years, Lily sobbed freely. And for the first time in 4 years, someone believed her, the secrets buried in the dark. The heavy courtroom doors slammed shut behind Thomas Reed. His angry protests echoed for a brief moment before they were swallowed by the silence. Judge Margaret Sinclair let out a slow breath, willing her heartbeat to steady. She had handled difficult cases before, but something about this one felt dangerous. Lily Monroe still trembled beside her, the weight of years of fear pressing down on her small frame. "Mama told me to run if something happened to her." Those words still rang in Judge Sinclair's ears. She knelt in front of Lily once more, her voice softer now. "Sweetheart, do you remember what else your mother said about Mr. Reed?" Lily sniffled, rubbing at her red, puffy eyes. "She said, he wasn't who he said he was. She said he hurt people before." Miss Hanley, the social worker, shifted nervously, flipping through her case files again. This doesn't make sense. Thomas Reed's record is clean." Judge Sinclair's jaw tightened. "Then we dig deeper." She turned to Officer Barnes, the bailiff, who still stood near the door. "Barnes, did you get anything on Reed's background check?" The officer frowned and checked his tablet. "Nothing yet, Judge. But I sent a request for an extended search through national records. If there's something out there, we'll find it." Judge Sinclair gave a sharp nod. "Good. Keep me updated." Then she turned back to Lily. The child was still trembling, still clutching the lace of her dress. But she looked up at Judge Sinclair with something new in her eyes. Hope. The judge softened her tone. "Do you feel safe going home with Ms. Hanley for now?" Lily hesitated. Then she shook her head. Tears welled up in her eyes again. "I don't want to go back to Mr. Reed's house," she whispered. "He has people who watch me." Judge Sinclair froze. Ms. Hanley blinked. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Lily sniffled. "Mr. Reed, he always told me that even if I ran, people would bring me back. He said they would find me wherever I go." Judge Sinclair's stomach dropped. This wasn't just a bad foster home situation. This was something bigger. Her mind raced. Who were these people watching Lily? And why did Thomas Reed think he could always get her back? Something wasn't adding up. Judge Sinclair turned to the bailiff again. "Barnes, I want security doubled outside this courthouse. No one comes near this child unless I approve it personally." Barnes nodded immediately. "Yes, Your Honor." Lily pressed closer to the judge, her tiny fingers still curled around the fabric of Sinclair's robe. "Please don't let them take me," she whispered. Judge Sinclair felt something in her chest crack open. She had seen so many children get lost in the system, but not this one. Never again. Unraveling the truth. 2 hours later, Judge Sinclair sat in her chambers, flipping through files with increasing frustration. Thomas Reed had no criminal record. No complaints. No history of violence. Yet everything about his demeanor screamed danger. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. A knock at the door made her sit up. "Come in." Officer Barnes entered, his face grim. He held a thick manila folder. "Judge," he said, "we found something." He dropped the file onto her desk. Judge Sinclair opened it, and her blood ran cold. Inside were 2 names. Thomas Reed, and his real identity, Daniel Grayson. Her fingers tightened around the paper. "His name isn't Thomas Reed?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. Barnes shook his head. "No, ma'am. He changed it 7 years ago. Before that, he was Daniel Grayson, a suspect in a missing persons case involving a child. Judge Sinclair's hands trembled. She flipped through the file, and then she saw it. A grainy black and white photo of a woman. Lily Monroe's mother. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. Lily's mother had gone missing 4 years ago. And the last person seen with her? Daniel Grayson. Judge Sinclair's grip on the paper tightened. The room tilted. She knew, in that moment, exactly what had happened. Thomas Reed wasn't just an abusive foster parent. He had killed Lily's mother. And now, he was trying to erase every trace of her. Judge Sinclair's heart pounded in her chest. She picked up her phone and dialed Barnes. "Put out a warrant for his arrest," she ordered. "Now." Barnes didn't hesitate. "Yes, Your Honor." But deep inside, Judge Sinclair knew. This wasn't over. Because men like Daniel Grayson didn't just disappear. And if he had people watching Lily, that meant he wasn't working alone. The break-in. That night, Judge Sinclair stayed at the courthouse, making sure Lily was under full protection. But at 2:17 a.m., the courthouse security alarms went off. A guard's voice crackled through the radio. "We've got an intruder. Multiple armed suspects at the east entrance." Then, the radio went dead. Judge Sinclair's stomach dropped. She rushed toward Lily's temporary holding room, her breath coming fast. But as she rounded the corner, she saw something that stopped her cold. The door was open. And Lily was gone. The vanishing act. The air inside the courthouse was thick with tension. Judge Margaret Sinclair stared at the empty room where Lily had been moments ago. The small cot where she had been resting was untouched, no signs of a struggle, no overturned chairs. Just, gone. Sinclair's pulse thundered in her ears as she turned to the nearest security officer, his face pale with shock. "Where is she?" she demanded, her voice sharp as a blade. The officer, a younger man named Carter, stammered. I was right outside the door, Your Honor. I didn't hear anything, didn't see anyone come in." A wave of dread swept over Judge Sinclair. Someone had taken Lily. And they had done it without making a sound. Officer Barnes' voice crackled over the radio. "We've got multiple intruders. They're in the East Wing. Armed and dangerous." Then, the radio cut out. Judge Sinclair's breath caught. This wasn't a simple kidnapping. It was an orchestrated operation. Who were these people? And why was Lily so important? A game of shadows. Sinclair grabbed the nearest security monitor and rewound the footage. The cameras showed nothing. No one entering. No one leaving. Lily had simply vanished. Her hands curled into fists. "This was planned," she murmured. Officer Carter swallowed hard. "Ma'am, who are these people?" Sinclair didn't answer. Instead, she turned toward the emergency exit. There was one place they hadn't checked yet. The parking garage. The chase begins. The courthouse basement was eerily silent. The dim lights overhead flickered as Sinclair moved swiftly down the concrete hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. Officer Barnes appeared at the end of the corridor, panting. "Judge, we found tire marks near the back exit." Then, a loud screech of tires echoed from outside. Sinclair ran. She burst through the emergency exit just in time to see a black SUV speeding off into the night. Her gut twisted. Lily was in that car. Sinclair didn't hesitate. She pulled out her phone and dialed Detective Ryan Calloway, the only cop she trusted with something this big. He picked up on the first ring. "Sinclair?" His voice was alert, sharp. "They took her," she said, forcing the panic out of her voice. A black SUV, no plates. I need every patrol car on this. Ryan didn't ask questions. I'm on it. Then, another voice cut through the night. Thomas Reed. He stood at the far end of the alley, a smirk stretching across his face. Like he had already won. Sinclair's blood went cold. You never should have interfered, Judge, he said smoothly. She took a step forward, anger flashing in her eyes. Where is she? Thomas shrugged. Safe. For now. Then, without another word, he disappeared into the shadows. Unraveling the truth. Judge Sinclair didn't sleep that night. Instead, she pored over every document she could find on Thomas Reed, Daniel Grayson. Whoever he really was. But one name kept showing up alongside his. Victor Daly. A businessman. A philanthropist. And, if Sinclair's instincts were right, a man with blood on his hands. Her fingers tightened around the papers. This was bigger than one man. This was a network. And Lily Monroe was at the center of it. The call that changed everything. At 3:42 a.m., Judge Sinclair's phone rang. A blocked number. She hesitated, then answered. At first, there was only silence. Then, a small, terrified voice. Judge Sinclair? Sinclair's breath caught in her throat. Lily? A shaky sob. I don't know where I am. Sinclair gripped the phone tighter. Listen to me, sweetheart. Do you see anything? Hear anything? A pause. Then, a whisper. There's a big gate. And, men with guns. Judge Sinclair's heart pounded. Stay quiet, Lily. I'm coming for you. Then, before Lily could answer. The line went dead, the final warning. The night was thick with tension, a suffocating presence that pressed against Judge Margaret Sinclair's chest. She stared at her phone's dark screen, her pulse racing. Lily was out there. Terrified. Alone. Surrounded by men with guns. And then the line had gone dead. The silence that followed felt more deafening than a scream. Sinclair forced herself to breathe. She couldn't afford to panic. She had spent her entire career fighting for justice, making sure the innocent weren't forgotten. And she would be damned if she let Lily Monroe become another lost child swallowed by a system that protected monsters like Thomas Reed. Her phone buzzed again. A text. From an unknown number. It was a single message. Back off. Or she disappears forever. Sinclair's jaw clenched. That wasn't an option. She grabbed her keys, threw on her coat, and dialed Detective Ryan Calloway as she headed for the door. A web of lies. By the time Sinclair reached the police precinct, Ryan was already waiting for her. His broad shoulders were tense, his jaw tight. He had seen the message. Whoever took her, he said, they're professionals. No digital trail, no surveillance footage. It's like they don't exist. Sinclair slammed the text message down on his desk. They exist, she said coldly. And they have Lily. Ryan nodded grimly. Then we don't have time to play by the rules. Sinclair knew what that meant. She hesitated for only a second before she nodded. Let's do it. The breakthrough. For hours, they dug into every connection Thomas Reed had. Every foster home he had been in. Every person he had done business with. Every suspicious transaction linked to his name. Then, finally, a lead. Victor Daly. Ryan's fingers flew over his keyboard as he pulled up a classified police report. Sinclair read over his shoulder, her heart pounding. Victor Daly, billionaire philanthropist, major donor to child welfare programs. Anne. Under federal investigation for human trafficking. Sinclair felt sick. This was bigger than they had ever imagined. Lily wasn't just a child caught in the middle of an adoption case. She was a witness. A threat to powerful people. And they were willing to kill to keep their secrets. Ryan cursed under his breath. We need to move. Now. The safe house raid. By the time they reached the outskirts of the city, the sun was rising, painting the sky in streaks of orange and red. Ryan had traced Victor Daly's most recent offshore transactions to a secluded mansion, the same place where Lily had described seeing a gate and armed men. They had one shot to get this right. A team of SWAT officers in black tactical gear surrounded the property, weapons drawn. Sinclair watched from the back of the surveillance van as Ryan gave the signal. Go! 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 The crash of metal and shattering glass filled the air as the team stormed the mansion. Sinclair held her breath. Please, let her be there. Gunfire erupted. Shouts. Running footsteps. Then. A child's scream. Sinclair didn't think. She ran. The monster behind the mask. Sinclair burst through the doors just in time to see Thomas Reed gripping Lily's wrist, dragging her toward a back exit. Let her go, she shouted. Reed turned. His face was twisted in rage. This wasn't a man. This was a predator who had finally been cornered. Lily sobbed, struggling against his grip. Mama told me never to trust you. Sinclair saw the flicker of pure fury in his eyes. And that's when she knew. Lily had always known the truth. Reed had tried to hide it. Had tried to erase it. But somewhere deep inside her, Lily remembered. And now, he was desperate. Reed yanked Lily closer, his other hand reaching into his coat. A gun. Sinclair's blood ran cold. Then. Bang! A single shot rang out. Reed collapsed. Ryan stood behind him, gun still raised. His voice was sharp. You're done. Sinclair rushed forward, kneeling beside Lily. The little girl threw herself into her arms, sobbing. And Sinclair held her tight, whispering, You're safe now, sweetheart. You're safe. The truth comes out. 2 days later, the entire country knew. Lily Monroe's case exposed one of the largest trafficking rings in the country. Thomas Reed, not her real foster father, but a man who had been grooming her since birth, was just a small piece of it. The real mastermind? Victor Daly. The man who had built a billion-dollar empire off of stolen lives. He was arrested that morning, taken down in an international sting operation. Sinclair watched it all unfold from the hospital room where Lily was recovering. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe. It was over. But was it really over? That night, as Sinclair sat beside Lily's hospital bed, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Her stomach twisted as she read the message. You think you've won. But this is far from over. Sinclair's blood ran cold. She turned toward Lily, watching the little girl sleep peacefully, unaware of the danger that still lurked in the shadows. Sinclair tightened her grip on the phone. This wasn't over. Not yet. And she was going to make damn sure that when it was, Lily would never have to be afraid again. Shadows strike back. Judge Margaret Sinclair sat in the dimly lit hospital room, watching Lily Monroe sleep. The little girl looked so peaceful, like she wasn't the key to exposing some of the most dangerous men in the country. But Sinclair knew better. Her phone screen glowed in the darkness. You think you've won. But this is far from over. Her fingers tightened around the device. Whoever sent this message, they weren't bluffing. Sinclair had spent her career staring down criminals, uncovering corruption, and delivering justice. But something about this, the way the message was sent immediately after Victor Daly's arrest, made her stomach churn. This wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And Sinclair knew exactly what that meant. Lily wasn't safe. Not yet. The enemy in the dark. Ryan Calloway stormed into the hospital room 10 minutes later, his face set in stone. "I had a feeling they wouldn't go down without a fight," he muttered, tossing his phone onto the table. "We just got word from Homeland Security." Sinclair sat up straight. "Tell me." Ryan exhaled sharply. Victor Daly was just a frontman. Sinclair's blood ran cold. Daly was powerful, but he was just a businessman. The real people in charge? They're ghosts. No digital footprints. No names. Just a handful of untouchable billionaires who've been running this ring for over 2 decades. Sinclair felt a chill creep up her spine. "So, what you're telling me," she said carefully, "is that we didn't cut off the head of the snake. We just pissed it off." Ryan nodded. "Exactly. A city on the edge." That night, the city changed. The news channels were on fire with Victor Daly's arrest. It should have been a victory. But instead, it was a declaration of war. Before sunrise, 5 high-ranking officials who had been working on the case resigned without explanation. A key witness vanished. And then, the hospital's power went out. Sinclair's pulse spiked as the room was swallowed in darkness. The emergency lights flickered on a second later, casting eerie red glows down the hallway. Ryan was already on his feet, reaching for his gun. "This isn't just a blackout," he growled. Sinclair turned toward Lily, who was still fast asleep. Completely unaware of the danger crawling closer. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Heavy. Measured. Approaching. Sinclair grabbed her phone and texted one word to the emergency response team. Now. The hospital's security system wasn't down. She had made sure of that. Within 30 seconds, the silent alarm activated. Within 60, every exit was locked down. By the time the intruder reached Lily's room, he found himself staring down the barrel of Ryan Calloway's Glock. "Move an inch," Ryan said coldly, "and I'll make sure you never walk again." The man didn't hesitate. He turned and ran. But he didn't make it far. Because before he reached the stairwell, SWAT officers tackled him to the ground. Sinclair stepped into the hallway, watching as the man was pinned down, struggling. He wasn't some random thug. He wore a tailored suit, expensive shoes, and a cold, dead stare. Sinclair recognized him instantly. Lucas Crane. Daly's personal fixer. If he was here, then this was bigger than they thought. The warning shot. They dragged Crane into an interrogation room, but he didn't speak. Not until Sinclair walked in. She set a single photograph on the table. A picture of Lily Monroe. Crane smirked. Adorable kid. Sinclair's stomach twisted, but she didn't let it show. "Who sent you?" He leaned back, expression unreadable. "Judge Sinclair, you're a smart woman. Smarter than most. So I'll give you some free advice." He leaned forward. "Drop this case. Walk away. Forget the girl." Sinclair's jaw clenched. "Not happening." Crane sighed and shook his head. "Then I suggest you start planning your funeral." Silence stretched between them. Then, he smiled. "Not yours. Hers." Sinclair's breath caught in her throat. That was the moment she knew. They weren't just coming after Lily. They were going to burn everything to the ground. Nowhere is safe. By the time Sinclair left the precinct, the sky was painted in shades of gold and gray. Lily was being moved to a classified safe house. It should have been secure. But Sinclair didn't trust should be. Not anymore. As she drove, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The streetlights flickered above her. A black SUV had been following her for the last 10 minutes. She made a sharp right turn. The SUV followed. Sinclair's hands tightened on the wheel. She reached for her phone, but before she could dial, the SUV sped up. She barely had time to react before. Crash. Her car spun out of control, tires screeching against the pavement. The last thing she saw before everything went black was a masked figure stepping out of the SUV. Then, darkness. The final battle begins. Margaret Sinclair has spent her life taking down the most corrupt criminals in the system. But now, the system is fighting back. She's been targeted. Lily is still in danger. And now, she's missing. Who took her? How far will they go to silence her? And more importantly, will she survive long enough to bring them all down?